We're talking about the Memeification of war. You know, really groping the bottom of the barrel to feel the contours of those lumpy dregs. How far down does the barrel go? Do you really have to ask?
Look, Russia is now being canceled, right?
It goes very far. Ah, yes. Russia is being canceled or deplatformed, and it's US-influenced cancel culture that's responsible for major US companies like McDonald's being triggered and suspending operations in Russia. You know, the treatment of Vladimir Putin really reminds me of the dunking on of Slobodan Milosevic or the total ratioing of Bashar al-Assad, though it's worth inspecting what punishments have been inflicted on Putin and Russia and seeing if it actually counts as what the right wing or the 20 or so op-eds a week would consider cancellation. Primarily, Putin, Russian banks, and Russian billionaires have been hit with sanctions. Many of their foreign-held assets have been frozen, and some are subject to travel bans outside of Russia. Though notably for the travel bans, Vladimir Putin was spared. That's right, you might run into him at Disney World next month, or more likely that Wizarding World park. Because we're living in it's just the glitchiest simulation imaginable. Anyway, major companies in the Russian economy are further restricted from raising money through the US market, and the US is putting a hold on many tech exports to Russia like chips and computer parts. Of course, one could argue that the people being canceled the most are the Ukrainians who've been killed or whose homes have been destroyed and who have been forced to flee the country, or the people who used to get their wheat from Russia or Ukraine who will now suffer in what the UN says could be a global food crisis. Much like a lot of cancel culture claims, it sure seems like the person comparing themselves to J.K. Rowling is the one doing all of the actual canceling. And by canceling, I once again mean murder. But also, the restrictions that Putin has put on his population himself are certainly far more vast a cancellation than anything a millionaire turf wizard novelist has endured.
Russia has officially blocked access to Instagram. The move is in response to Meta's decision to allow Facebook and Instagram users in some countries to call for violence against Russian soldiers and Vladimir Putin over the invasion of Ukraine. Social media companies have cracked down on hate speech in recent years, but the war has put pressure on Silicon Valley to publicly condemn Russia, ultimately creating what now some refer to as a, quote, new digital iron curtain.
Russia blocked access to Facebook and Twitter in late February, and then cut off Instagram about a week later, which is disastrous if you're trying to get a discount on cosmetics by following your favorite Love Island stars, Love Island UK, of course. Russia said it was mugging off Twitter and Facebook because the sites had banned state-sponsored media, but it's pretty clear that the move was made to restrict the Russian people's access to information the government might not approve of. And look, while we would love to celebrate the revenue hit that Twitter and the company formerly known as Facebook will take because of this, social media in Russia is also among the primary conduits by which Russians engage with the rest of the world. Russian influencers and media personalities in the hours before Instagram was cut off were asking their fans to follow them on Telegram of all places, because it's a platform that can get users real-time, unfiltered reports from Russia and Ukraine, and also an orca tank full of misinformation. But it's hard to blame Russians for seeking out information this way. The same day Facebook and Twitter were cut off, Putin signed a law allowing for 15-year prison sentences for anyone reporting information about the Russian armed forces that Russia deemed to be false. A number of news organizations pulled staff from inside Russia over concerns that their reporters could be imprisoned for any reporting that makes the Russian military look bad. And pretty much all accurate reporting is going to make the Russian military look bad right now, since they invaded and are blowing up a country of 44 million people. And Putin himself is still using misinformation and half-truths to his advantage, and is even being aided by right-wing media in the US. But I wonder who could be doing that.
In fact, the U.S. Embassy in Kiev has acknowledged joint American and Ukrainian research on other pathogens, such as hemorrhagic fever virus. Apparently, there's a lot of this going on in Ukraine, funded by the United States. Did you know that? Why Ukraine? We don't know. We can only guess.
Oh, grand. Except that we don't have to only guess, like Turbo Shartson is saying. We know that there are bio-research labs in Ukraine and around the world being funded by the US, and that many of these labs are doing research on pathogens. And while it is fair to ask questions about their safety and necessity, it is flat-out propaganda to suggest without any evidence that the ones in Ukraine might be secretly developing bioweapons to use in tandem with the US government, when again, there are labs all over the damn world that do this. But look, This segment is not about trumpet-balling friends. We're not here to give him 4 Pinocchios or 6 George Costanzas or 12 Jim Carreys in the first act of Liar Liar, but that claim that the US and Ukraine are working jointly on bioweapons labs was rapidly amplified by him after it emerged in relative obscurity. It appears to have started with the since-suspended Twitter account War Clandestine, who mused hours after the invasion started that Putin was likely targeting biolabs in Ukraine, and tied this to the conspiracy theory spread by the Russian disinformation apparatus that the US had bioengineered the novel coronavirus in a lab. That musing by literally some guy, made its way around QAnon-connected social media, then to InfoWars, and ultimately to Tucker Carlson, and unfortunately, your eye holes and earballs. A Kremlin memo from early March and published by Mother Jones highlighted the bioweapons conspiracy theory, featuring the same bullshit talking points highlighted by Tucker Carlson, and encouraged state-friendly media outlets to frequently use segments from his show. That's what leads to clips like this, where Russian subtitles appear under Tucker for broadcast on state-controlled media outlet RT. And, I don't know, if a state-sponsored propaganda outlet, not just from Russia but like anywhere, started using clips of this show to make its argument, especially if that country had just illegally invaded another country, I would take a look at what I was saying and why I might be politically aligned with anyone and doing propaganda for someone cluster bombing residential neighborhoods, a thing I would like to make clear right now that I am against. It just seems like Tucker Carlson should, if he were an actual person with feelings, want to walk into the ocean in immense shame, is my point. One of the big issues here is that Putin and his government have been pretty good at using disinformation to their advantage over the years, often utilizing social media to craft a narrative out of flat-out falsehoods, but also out of half-truths or contextless truths. A few quarter truths in there as well, I'm sure. Some of the propaganda is easy to spot and dismiss. For example, there's the Russian-initiated rumors from the 1980s that the US invented AIDS, and of course the US did not invent AIDS, though they did the only slightly less damning thing of ignoring it and treating it like a big joke for years. There's also the far less successful story that originated on a Russian troll farm that hundreds of thousands of black children were being kidnapped and their organs harvested. That assertion was roundly mocked online after appearing on Tumblr, but Russian troll accounts were much more successful once they realized that if you want Americans to believe a ridiculous conspiracy theory about Satan-worshipping pedophiles, kidnapping children, and harvesting organs, it helps to make those children white. And to make the Satan-worshipping pedophiles an entire political party. Then you'll get something out into the world that 16% of Americans still believe. So, way to go, Russian trolls. You did it. There are also Russian efforts that serve only to confuse and make it so nobody's really sure what is real and what is fake. That's why Russia's Internet Research Agency and other troll farms encourage both protesters and counter-protesters on the same issue in Facebook groups in the US. It's why they mock up supposed examples of Ukraine war misinformation and then debunk it in fake fact checks. If you can't be sure that the trusted resource you're reading isn't really a source of Russian disinformation, how can you really make a judgment? Well, I can, of course. I have my own fact-checking system. I ask one fact checker what the other fact checker would say if I asked him if he was telling the truth. It's very complicated, trust me, but it's worked so far. I've rescued like 6 babies this way. And then there are things that have an inkling, if you will, a smidge, a scotch, a Spotify artist royalty of truth behind it. Take Putin's argument that part of the reason he's invading Ukraine is to denazify it. What he's referring to is likely the Azov Battalion, a far-right neo-Nazi group that formed in Ukraine in May 2014 after Russia invaded and annexed the Crimean Peninsula. This group sucks most, if not all, of the turds. They and other far-right extremists have been accused of attacking migrants and ethnic minorities in Ukraine, and former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko praised the group for fighting against Russian-backed separatists, ultimately folding them into the Ukrainian National Guard. This is something Ukraine, at the time, definitely tried to downplay, leading to concerns that not confronting the issue could bolster Russia's information campaign. Though, perhaps a more pressing concern is that not confronting the issue could bolster the number of open neo-Nazis in your National Guard, but okay, whatever. Congress was consistently sending aid to the Ukrainian military since the annexation of Crimea, and tried to remove funding that might make its way to the Azov Battalion. But they lifted this ban following pressure from the Pentagon, because the Pentagon loves arming, whoever. So yeah, that's not great. Nobody's argued that it's great, or good, in fact. In fact, you could call it bad. But saying that Ukraine requires denazification and thus justifies an invasion that has already killed scores more people than this fringe group ever has is a real stretch. Especially when you got your own Nazi problem. There's only an estimated 900 people in the group, and it doesn't hold any real influence in Ukrainian politics or over the Ukrainian people. Compare that to, the amount of white supremacists in the US, many of which are members of our own military and police force, perhaps even our actual government. We're stupid with Nazis over here. It's, dare I say, not good. But imagine if one day Mexico or Canada decided to invade the US and claim it's because of the Oath Keepers or some shit like that. That would be whack and or bogus. But that little kernel of reality, that there are neo-Nazis in Ukraine and that those guys have fought against Russia in the past, has been used as part of its information campaign, now ironically successful on right-leaning social media, to argue that it justifies the unjustifiable. But to be fair and balanced, maybe it's all true and justifiable and the reason for the invasion. Let's check on the peace talks, during which Russia dropped their denazification request. Oh, weird. Hey, thanks for watching that clip. Here's the evergreen end plate to ask you to like and subscribe. It's any day of the year where you are.